The waiting room was so cold I could feel it in my teeth, and my hands were shaking so badly I could not hold the paper cup the nurse had handed me. When my granddaughter Sophie rushed through those hospital doors, her coat still half on her shoulders, and grabbed my wrists and whispered, "Grandma, why did your card get declined? I checked your account. You sold your house for $180,000. Where did it go?" I could not answer her, because standing 3 feet behind her was my son Thomas, and the look on his face told me everything I had been too afraid to understand for the past 2 years. "My name is Dorothy Evans. I am 68 years old. I have short silver hair and reading glasses I keep losing on top of my own head. I taught 4th grade for 31 years at Millbrook Elementary in Columbus, Ohio. I know how to manage a classroom of 29 children who all want different things at the same time. I know how to balance a budget down to the last dollar. I know how to take care of myself." But that Tuesday afternoon, sitting in the cardiology waiting room with an empty wallet and a declined card, and my son's eyes watching me from across the room, I felt like I did not know anything at all. Let me go back to where this started. 2 years ago, my husband Gerald passed. We had been married 43 years. Gerald handled our investments. He was the one who read the statements, who called the broker, who kept the filing cabinet organized. After he was gone, I was left with a house we owned outright, a teacher's pension of $4,200 a month, and a filing cabinet full of papers I did not fully understand. Thomas came to visit 2 weeks after the funeral. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I used to help him with homework, and he held both my hands and said, "Mom, you should not be dealing with all of this alone. You're grieving. Let me help." He had always been a caring boy. At least, I believed that. He brought a man with him the second visit. His name was Carl Briggs. Carl had a firm handshake, a navy blazer, and a business card that read, "Briggs Property Solutions, Real Estate and Asset Management." He told me that keeping a large house alone was expensive, that property taxes in our neighborhood had gone up, that the market was strong right now and I could sell, invest the proceeds wisely, and move into something smaller with far less maintenance. He said Thomas had told him I was a practical woman. He said practical women made practical decisions. I asked if I needed a lawyer to review anything. Carl smiled and said, "Of course, if you feel you need one." Thomas squeezed my hand. "Mom, Carl is a family friend. We trust him. Do you trust me?" I looked at my son. I thought about the time he was 7 and broke my favorite vase and cried until I told him it was okay. I thought about the way he still called me every Sunday morning, even after he married Linda. "Yes," I said. "I trust you." I sold the house 4 months later. $178,500. "It was a fair price," Carl said. "The market had shifted slightly, but we moved at the right time." He recommended moving the funds into a managed investment account he oversaw, something he called a liquidity bridge account, which would hold the money while we identified a smaller property for me to purchase. It was temporary, he said, just until the right home came available. I moved into a small apartment in Westerville. It was fine, I told myself. It was temporary. Thomas set up online access for the account. He said it was easier for him to monitor on my behalf since I was not familiar with investment platforms. He said he would send me summaries. At first, he did. Then the summaries became shorter. Then they stopped. When I asked questions, Thomas always had answers. "The market is volatile right now, Mum. Carl is repositioning assets. You don't want to trigger tax penalties by moving funds prematurely. Just be patient." I was patient. I am a schoolteacher. Patience is something I know. But the apartment lease was coming up for renewal, and I still had not found a new home. Every property Carl suggested was either too expensive or, at the last moment, fell through. Thomas said the inventory was low. He said next spring would be better. I believed him. I waited. Then my heart started doing something it was not supposed to do. My doctor said it was atrial fibrillation, not immediately dangerous, but requiring monitoring, and a procedure called a cardioversion that my insurance would partially cover. The remainder, roughly $2,800, was my responsibility. I called Thomas. He said the account was in a 30-day rebalancing period and he could not pull funds without penalties. He said he would cover it personally and I could pay him back later. He sent a check. I thanked him. I did not ask more questions, but the morning of the procedure, sitting in that waiting room in the hospital gown that never quite closes in the back, The admissions woman told me my insurance information had an error. She needed a card for the co-pay deposit. I handed over the debit card Thomas had given me for what he called personal expenses, a card linked to a small sub-account he had set up. It declined. She tried again. Declined. That was when I called Sophie. Sophie is my daughter Patricia's girl. She is 26, just finished her master's degree in social work, and has her mother's eyes and her grandfather Gerald's stubbornness, which is to say she does not let things go. She drove 45 minutes to reach me, and walked through those hospital doors with her coat still falling off her shoulder. After she whispered that question, after the silence fell between us, Thomas stepped forward. He said, "Sophie, this isn't the place." She turned to look at him. She had always been polite to Thomas. That day she was not. "Uncle Thomas," she said carefully, "I checked the account routing number on the statement Grandma showed me last year, the one account statement she has. The balance in that account right now is $4,100. She paused. "Where is the rest of it?" Thomas's face did something complicated. He looked at Carl, who had appeared in the doorway behind him. I had not even seen Carl come in. That was when the feeling in my chest changed from confusion to something colder. Carl stepped forward with his hands in his pockets and said, "Ladies, this is a complex financial situation. There are investment cycles, locked periods, penalty structures. This is not something to discuss in a public waiting room." Sophie looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "You're right. We'll discuss it at the bank." She pulled out her phone and called her mother. Patricia arrived within the hour. She is my younger daughter, quieter than Sophie but twice as steady. She did not raise her voice. She sat beside me, took my hand, and looked at Thomas and said, "Tell us everything. Now." Thomas looked exhausted. He rubbed the back of his neck the way he used to do as a teenager when he had been caught in something. Carl started to speak and Patricia said, "Not you. My brother." There was a silence in that waiting room that I will not forget for the rest of my life. Thomas finally said that Carl had suggested a development investment 18 months ago, a mixed-use property in a Columbus suburb, the kind of project that generated strong returns in 12 to 18 months. He said it was a sure thing. He said he had used a portion of my house proceeds as part of the investment group's capital. Just a portion. Temporarily. "How much?" Sophie asked. Thomas looked at the floor. "Most of it," he said. There was an uproar I will not describe in detail because this is my story and I am trying to tell it with some dignity. What I will say is that Patricia did not cry. Sophie did not shout. They both went very quiet, which in our family means something far more serious than tears or shouting. Sophie looked at Carl. "Is the project still active?" He said there had been delays. She asked what kind of delays. He said the permitting process had been complicated by a zoning reclassification. She asked how long the project had been stalled. He paused one beat too long, and that pause told me everything. We did not resolve it that day. I had my procedure, which went well, because my heart at least was still following instructions. Patricia paid the copay from her own account. That night, Sophie sat at my small apartment kitchen table with her laptop open and her reading glasses on, which she has worn since age 11 and is deeply embarrassed about, and she started searching. Briggs Property Solutions had a website with stock photos and no verifiable project addresses. Carl Briggs had a real estate license in Ohio, but it had been placed on inactive status 14 months ago. There was a complaint filed with the Ohio Division of Real Estate by another investor. There was a civil suit, settled confidentially. Sophie found it in court records, which are public, because she knows how to look. She turned the laptop toward me. I read slowly. The suit described a pattern, targeting recently widowed homeowners, offering property management and investment services, moving assets into controlled accounts, stalling with technical language until funds were difficult to recover. I felt a sound come out of me that was not quite a word. "Grandma," Sophie said gently. "This was not your fault." I looked at her face. She meant it. But I also knew that somewhere in the sequence of trusting my son and trusting his friend and signing papers without reading every line, I had let this happen. Not caused it, but let it. And there is a difference, even if both of them hurt. I called Thomas that night. He answered on the first ring, which told me he had been waiting. I did not ask him how he felt. I asked him one question. "Did you know what Carl was doing?" There was a very long pause. Then he said, I thought it was a real investment, Mom. I didn't know it was going to go like this, I said. But you used my money without telling me clearly what the risks were, he said. Carl said it was solid. I said, that is not an answer to my question. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said he was sorry. I said I knew. I said sorry was not enough right now. But it was a start. And then I told him we were going to the bank in the morning, and I needed him to be there with every document he had. He said okay. His voice sounded small, the way it sounded when he was 7 and standing next to the broken vase. The next morning was hard. Sophie drove. Patricia sat in the back with me. Thomas met us outside the bank. He did not bring Carl, which I took as a sign that somewhere in him, something still knew right from wrong. The bank manager was a woman named Mrs. Okafor. She was efficient and kind and did not make me feel foolish, which I appreciated more than I could say. She pulled up my accounts. The managed investment account that Carl had established was technically under a business entity named BPS Capital Holdings. My funds had been transferred there under documentation that listed a power of attorney granted to Thomas Thompson, my son. I looked at Thomas. When did I sign that? He looked at the table. It was one of the papers from the early meetings, he said. It was in a stack. Carl said. It was standard. Mrs. Okafor explained clearly. And I want to repeat this because it is important. A power of attorney can be revoked. At any time. By the person who granted it, as long as that person is mentally competent. Which I am. I have always been. I signed a revocation form right there at her desk. My hand was steady. She also explained that using a power of attorney to move an elderly person's assets, for purposes that do not benefit that person directly, is not a grey area. It is financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult under Ohio law. She said the bank was required to file a report with their compliance department, and they would. She said we should also contact the Ohio Attorney General's Elder Abuse Unit. Carl Briggs called my phone while we were still sitting in that office. I showed the screen to Mrs. Okafor. She suggested I not answer. Sophie took a photograph of the incoming call with the timestamp. She had already been doing things like this for 2 days. I had underestimated that girl's instincts. We did contact the Attorney General's office. We filed a report that same afternoon. A woman there, named Diane, walked us through what would happen next. An investigator would review the complaint. The BPS Capital Holdings account would be flagged. Carl Briggs's license complaint history would be part of the record. She told us that civil recovery was possible, that we should retain an independent attorney. Thomas sat through all of it. He did not argue. He did not defend Carl. He answered every question the investigator asked him, and when they asked whether he had been aware that Carl had similar complaints filed against him, he said he had not known. I watched his face when he said it. I have been reading faces for 68 years. He was telling the truth about that part. At least, what Thomas had known, and what came out slowly over the following weeks, was that the investment had failed almost immediately, that Carl had been moving money between entities to disguise it, and that Thomas had been too proud to tell me. He had believed that one more month, one more quarter, the project would turn around. He had told himself the story that all proud people tell themselves when they are in over their heads. I almost had it fixed. You almost never need to know. Carl Briggs was ultimately the target of a formal investigation by the Ohio Division of Real Estate and the Attorney General's Elder Abuse Unit. He had done this before, to 3 other widowed homeowners over 4 years. The civil complaint that Sophie found was not the first. His pattern was specific and practiced. He would not have stopped without being stopped. Thomas cooperated fully with investigators. His cooperation was documented and noted. It did not erase what had happened, but it mattered. He also, and I want to say this because it is true, sold his car and borrowed against his 401 and returned $61,000 to me within 60 days of that meeting at the bank. It was not $178,500, but it was everything he could liquidate without losing his family's home. He handed me a check at my kitchen table and could not look me in the eye when he did it. I held it for a moment. I thought about Gerald, who would have been so hurt by all of this. I thought about the house we lived in for 22 years, the kitchen where I baked birthday cakes, the backyard where Thomas and Patricia used to fight over the garden hose in summer. That house was gone. I could not go back to it. But I was not in the dark. My pension arrived every month into an account only I could access. The power of attorney was revoked, and on record. My accounts were flagged for senior protection monitoring at the bank, a service Mrs. Okafor told me about that I did not know existed. Sophie had added a calendar reminder to review my statements with me every month over video call. Thomas came to my apartment 3 weeks after the bank meeting. He did not bring Linda. He sat across from me at the same kitchen table, in the same chair, and he said, "I want to explain to you why I didn't tell you." I said I was listening. He said he had never forgiven himself for how little he understood about money before Gerald died. He said Dad always handled everything, and when Dad was gone, he felt like he had to prove he could step in. He said Carl told him the investment was a sure thing, and he wanted to be the son who found you a good thing after everything you lost. He said, "I know that does not make it right." He said I was afraid that if it failed, you would think less of me than you think of Patricia. I looked at him for a long time. "Do you know what I thought of you before all of this?" He shook his head. "I thought you were a man who called his mother every Sunday morning." His face crumpled. "That is worth more than any investment Carl Briggs ever promised you," he cried then. My son, who is 44 years old and has a beard going grey at the edges, sat at my kitchen table and cried the way he did when he was 7 years old. And I let him, because underneath all of it, underneath the pride and the bad decisions and the papers I should not have signed without reading, was a boy who loved his mother and lost his father and did not know how to ask for help. That does not excuse what happened. It explains part of it. There is a difference between excusing and understanding, and I learned that distinction in 31 years of teaching children who made mistakes. The investigation into Carl Briggs resulted in formal charges filed by the state. His license was permanently revoked. 3 other families came forward once the case was publicized. A portion of the recovered assets from his business accounts was directed toward restitution for victims, and I am told my case is part of that proceeding. I do not know how much I will see. My attorney says to be patient. I am still good at that. I found a small house to rent in Westerville, not far from Sophie's apartment. It has a yard that is just large enough for a garden. The kitchen gets morning light. I keep the refrigerator full. I check my account balance every single week, on my own, from my own computer, with my own password that no one else knows. One evening in November, Sophie came for dinner. We sat at the table after we ate and she said, "Grandma, I need to ask you something. Why didn't you tell me sooner that things felt wrong?" I looked at my soup bowl for a moment. Because I thought if I said it out loud, it would mean I had made a terrible mistake. And I was ashamed of that. She shook her head. "You didn't make a mistake. Someone took advantage of the fact that you were grieving and trusting," I said. "But I signed things I did not read carefully." She said, "You're human, Grandma. That's not a flaw. It's just human." I have thought about that conversation many times since then. If you are listening to this right now, and you are managing finances alone for the first time, or someone has offered to help you, and something about it feels slightly off but you cannot name why, I want to say this clearly. That feeling has a name. It is instinct. And instinct earned over a lifetime of paying attention is worth more than any professional's business card or friendly handshake or explanation full of words you do not quite recognize. You have the right to read every document before you sign it. You have the right to bring someone you trust to any meeting where papers are involved. You have the right to ask the same question 3 times until you understand the answer. You have the right to say, "I need a week to think about this," and you have the right to walk away if that request is not respected. A power of attorney is not permanent. You can revoke it. You can change the locks, literally and in every other sense. You can call the bank and ask for senior account monitoring. You can call your state's attorney general if you believe you have been financially exploited. These are not dramatic steps. These are practical ones. And practical women make practical decisions. I still talk to Thomas. Our Sunday morning calls are shorter now, and sometimes there is a silence in them that did not used to be there. But he calls. And some mornings, when the light comes through my kitchen window the right way, and the coffee is hot and my garden has something growing that was not there last week, I think that silence might eventually fill back in, not with what was there before, with something more honest. Gerald used to say that trust is not something you give once. It is something you choose, again and again, with clear eyes. I think I understand that now in a way I did not when he was alive to say it to me. The morning light is still there, the coffee is still hot, the account balance is what it should be, and I am the one who knows that. Not because someone told me, but because I checked. If this story reached you today, and something in it felt familiar, do not wait. Turn on the light. Pick up the phone. Ask the question you have been afraid to ask. Because silence, no matter how peaceful it looks from the outside, is never worth what it costs. Please like this video and subscribe to Silver's revenge story, because somewhere out there is someone who needs to hear that it is never too late to take back what is yours.